Well, hello, everyone. Welcome. It's great to see you all here in person, and those of you who are streaming online, delighted to have you with us today. I'm Fritz Mayer. I'm the Dean of the Korbel School here at the University of Denver, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's conversation with Carol Spahn, Director of the Peace Corps. A conversation about the Peace Corps' work in local communities to address global challenges. Before we get started, I understand we have a short video about the Peace Corps, which we'll show now, and then I will introduce our speaker.
Are you looking for more in this world? Are you ready to be part of something bigger? Then we are looking for you. The big-hearted, the bold, the messy and gutsy, the teachers, the growers, the builders, the skilled, the sharers, the change makers. We need you. We are the Peace Corps. In more than 60 countries, we go all in and go all out. We are volunteers, partners, communities, working together, living together, bringing our experience, passion, and joy to building a better world together. We're powered by connection. We're driven by purpose. We join hands to make a difference. We open our arms, our hearts, our doors, our minds. We learn more, give more. We share freely and serve boldly. Are you ready to tackle the tough stuff? Learn more than you teach. Plant ideas and grow wise. To go the distance to make a difference. And we have a place where you belong. Join us. The Peace Corps, going the distance to make a difference.
Well, as you saw in the video, the Peace Corps is a remarkable American institution. How many do we have returned Peace Corps volunteers in the audience? Just raise your hand. Oh, wow. That's really awesome. As we say to members of the armed forces, thank you for your service. It's in 2021, I think, the Peace Corps celebrated 60 years. Over 240,000 Americans, that's hard to believe, have served in 140 nations to date. And, really making an impact in the world, but also, as those of you who are volunteers know, making an impact in your lives, and of so many leaders in this country. I can't tell you how many times I feel bad that I'm not a former Peace Corps volunteer, but I meet so many amazing people and discover later that they were Peace Corps volunteers. It's an incredible experience. The Korbel School has had a great relationship and a long history of engagement with the Peace Corps. We have a number of dual alums here, alums of the Korbel School and of the Peace Corps. So many of our students who come here, we were talking at lunch, it's just such for us, selfishly, like, we love you because it's like a fantastic background for students coming to study at the Korbel School. That mix of idealism and experience that is really special. I'm really proud of the way we, like many other institutions, but proud of the way we responded when the Peace Corps volunteers around the world were evacuated on amazing. I didn't realize how short a time period until we were talking at lunch, and in a matter of less than 2 weeks, I think, was how many?
8.
8 days. 8 days. There were 7,000 Peace Corps volunteers out there who came back, and we learned that this was about to happen, and we were able to put an offer on the table, and we were proud to host, we had 56 Peace Corps volunteers come to the Korbel School that year. we would gladly have 56 every year if we could. That was just marvelous. By the way, the same offer is on the table. We still have a 50% off special arrangement for Peace Corps volunteers. So, and we're still recruiting. So, you know, contact your network. Still, we're still open for business. Don't worry about the deadlines. We'll take care of that. Anyway, so honored to have the director of the Peace Corps speaking with us today. Carol Spahn is the 21st director of the Peace Corps. She brings more than 25 years of public and private sector experience to bear on her position now. She's worked in countries around the world on issues ranging from small business development and infectious disease prevention to women's empowerment. Prior to her current role, she most recently served as the Peace Corps' Chief Executive Officer and has also served as the Peace Corps' Chief of Operations in Africa and as Country Director in Malawi. Importantly, she is herself a Peace Corps volunteer, was a Peace Corps volunteer in Romania, where you served as a small business advisor, I understand. Most importantly, she's the mother of a Corbell School alum, which I did not know until lunch today. So welcome, Director Spahn. And our moderator today is Aaron Schneider. Professor Schneider is professor here at the Corbell School, director of our Institute of Comparative and Regional Studies, that umbrella group that hosts our area studies program, and he directs the MA program in international development. His courses here at the Corbell School focus on development, obviously, and his research on particularly in the study of public finance as a window into the political economy of development and democracy. He also has an important connection to the Peace Corps. His father was the 15th director of the Peace Corps, so the perfect person to moderate today's panel. So thank you for doing that. Aaron.
So I have a couple of notes, and thank you, Dean Mayer, for that introduction, and thanks, of course, to Director Spahn for being here today. And I have a couple of other thank yous to mention. Thank you to all of the Returned Peace Corps volunteers who are here, and to the Association of Returned Peace Corps Volunteers of Colorado, especially Samantha Temple and Steve Werner, who really worked hard on today's event. And they're hosting an event tomorrow at 5 in this very room for Returned Peace Corps volunteers, the Returned Peace Corps Volunteer Association, their friends, and Director Spahn, and some of the other former directors who are connected here to Colorado, who will be here. Thank you to Jill and Kristen, who went through all of the logistics to make today and a number of the events in which Corbell is connected to the City Summit of the Americas. And as long as I'm thanking and acknowledging, it is our practice that we acknowledge the Cheyenne, Ute, and Arapaho, who are the original stewards of the land on which the University of Denver sits. Fritz mentioned that we brought in 50 plus Peace Corps volunteers. Most of them came to the development program, and I'm the director of the MA in development program. So Peace Corps and the Peace Corps volunteers really have been an important part of just thinking and good work here at Corbell. And the Peace Corps program really is the best good work that the US government does in its foreign policy, which hasn't always done good work around the world. And so, you know, it's especially pleasurable for me to be connected to the Peace Corps in the way that I am through my father, and to host Director Spahn and the Peace Corps here today. I've got a couple of questions that we can use to start a discussion, and we'll open up to questions afterwards, after this short conversation. And I think that there are cards that are on your table or that can be passed around. You can fill in questions if you'd like, and we'll collect those, and we'll make sure that the audience has a chance to ask his questions. And there were some that came in online already. I'll make sure those that we get to those first. So the first question that I was going to use to start our conversation, and Fritz has already mentioned some of the statistics on the great impact that Peace Corps has had. And every year, 3,500 to 4,000 new volunteers visit 60 plus countries, really an impressive impact and program. But these numbers don't necessarily tell the whole story on the ground. So I'd like you to tell us about the impact of the Peace Corps in the world. And in particular, maybe you can elaborate a little bit on how the pandemic has impacted these outcomes and how we've had to adapt programs like Peace Corps over the last 3 years.
Well, thank you for starting with an easy question. Really appreciate that. And really first, just a lot of gratitude to the Corbell School, to Steve and everyone who has made this possible. It's great to be here. It feels a bit like a homecoming. Certainly spent a lot of time here over the years while my daughter was here. And it's just a great community, a great school, and just really, really happy to be here. I've had a lot of people ask me how to quantify the impact of Peace Corps. And for those who have served, I think there is no way to properly do it justice. I listen to stories around the world, and I wish I could just bottle them and bottle the energy that comes from each of these different engagements, and unleash it so that the people could internalize what Peace Corps actually means. And as we're looking back across 62 years, what started as an experiment, it was built on the experiment in international living. What would it mean if we did this? And flash forward 62 years, it's not an experiment anymore. Like I have the privilege of talking with prime ministers, ministers of health, community members, restaurant owners, sort of wherever I go in some of the countries where Peace Corps volunteers have served. They tell me about how their Peace Corps volunteer impacted them. And it's very personal. And sometimes they share how they paid it forward, how they paid school fees for someone else, or how it has opened up opportunities for them, or just simply opened up different ways of thinking for the people that we've served. So I can tell you that, Peace Corps contributed to smallpox eradication. For some of the last people to go out into some of the most remote areas around the world doing case finding, trudging through the mountains of Ethiopia and going out into communities in Afghanistan. I could tell you we were involved in guinea worm eradication. I could tell you how many students we taught. I could tell you that in 2019, we reached over 1.5 million young people with all kinds of different programs. But that's just a small fraction of the story. I can't imagine working for an organization with a bigger mission. So our mission is world peace and friendship. It's a small thing I wake up every day thinking about how to accomplish. But really, the premise is that world peace and friendship is not the business of governments necessarily, or businesses. It's the business of each and every one of us and how we show up in the world and how we come together across difference. And so each and every volunteer is contributing to world peace and friendship by the relationships that they develop and by caring enough to leave their home, stretch well beyond their comfort zone, and go out and be with other people speaking their language and living and working side by side with them as they work, sort of recognizing the assets that community has. How do you measure that? How do you measure the impact that has over decades? And how do you measure the impact that it has on the people who do it themselves? And we think about the over 7,000 of those 240,000 volunteers come from the great state of Colorado. And how do you measure the impact that those volunteers are having right here at home? People who are incredibly active in the community, and who bring that value system, that ethos of deep respect and cultural humility into everything that they do. So the question is very big. And, again, if someone can take all of that and come up with a very concise elevator speech or talking point, please help me, because it's told in the stories, it's told in the impact, and then at the national level, here is a sort of fun fact. I discovered that there is a research study out there that looks at the Pew favorability ratings. So, how do countries feel about the United States? And they looked at the number of Peace Corps volunteers, over a period of, I believe, 15 or 20 years, and how those favorability ratings changed over time. So this was the first thing I've seen that had anything sort of at a national level. And it showed a correlation, not causation. And it showed a significant negative correlation when Peace Corps left, right? It means something bigger than just the impact of one volunteer, for 2 years in one country. Like, there's a symbolic impact as well, of Peace Corps having a presence. And I'm very, very proud, and I will not take credit for this at all, because it was 17 years in the making, but had the very big privilege in December to swear in the first group of 9 volunteers in Vietnam. Incredibly powerful. Thank you. It means a lot, right? It means a lot for us as a country. I've spoken with many, a person who helped make that happen, or a returned volunteer, or someone who really grew up in that era, or maybe served in the war themselves, and, brought them to tears, to know that that's where we are right now.
Interesting. Thanks so much. I want to take this opportunity also to get to know you a little bit better. As we know now, my father was director of the Peace Corps, and he considered it the pinnacle to his government career, which began as a Peace Corps volunteer almost 35 years earlier in El Salvador. So I would like to hear a little bit about your trajectory. What previous experiences did you have that were the best preparation for your current position?
Wow. So let me just first say, this is the honor of a lifetime, an unexpected honor. And I think COVID asked us all to step up and do things we maybe didn't imagine ourselves doing. So it really is just a privilege to be here during this very unique time in the agency's history as we rebuild. And having been in the field recently as a country director, and then served in the Africa region throughout the evacuation, and as we were looking at how we go back into the field in a very complex environment, I think was obviously the best training for what it is that we're trying to do now. But, as with anything, you have to pull on all of your skills. And, I talk to students a lot and say, life doesn't happen in a straight line, and you never know when you will be asked to step into something you didn't expect, or when life will throw you a curveball and you have to pull back. This is not in my bio, but I will confess to you all that I have an undergraduate degree in accounting.
Fascinating.
Yes, I do. I do. And I was in an event at the White House, the Office of Science and Technology Policy. They were talking about investing in nature and talking about innovation. And one of the innovations was looking at climate impacts and how do you account for that and put it on the balance sheet? Yes, my moment has finally come. Accounting is innovation. Like, my dreams have come true. So no, I started my career in accounting, and as communism was falling around the world, and what an amazing opportunity. I went to the Peace Corps in post-communist Romania to do small business development. As you can imagine, an entire economy moving from a state-run economy to, individual entrepreneurs being able to start businesses. It was, incredibly impactful. And having grown up in that era, that Cold War era, to go and meet people and really learn and see what's really happening, was transformative. And that launched me sort of into a field in global international development that you heard ranged in a lot of different fields, right? So initially from a back office perspective, so investing in small and medium-sized companies in developing countries. And, as life would have it, when you have young kids, that's travel started to get to me, and went in another direction, learned about infectious diseases, and was doing a lot of fundraising, which is, wasn't what I wanted to do. And then, moved into women's empowerment in post-conflict zones. So I've done grassroots in conflict zones, infectious diseases in Africa, small and medium-sized investing around the world. And somehow it made sense when I came back to Peace Corps, right? Otherwise, it's people are like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this and that? And how does it fit? And so it's really been, like I said, the unexpected culmination of a lot of experiences that you can tap into in different ways.
Thanks. It's interesting that you mentioned the end of the Cold War as one moment. In many ways, I feel like we're at another moment
We are.
of world history. We've got war, inflation, stagnation, environmental crisis, inequality, fascism around the world. Such moments are difficult. And the Peace Corps, as we know, plays a unique role in US government and US foreign policy. When you think a few years into the future, how would you like to look back at this moment and say at what Peace Corps has achieved in this extremely uncertain moment?
So yes, this is, and I continue to remind our teams around the world, like we are shaping right now what the world will look like after an event that impacted every single country around the world. And when you step back and really think about that, it closed off every country, it closed off communities, it closed off families. And that's profound. In our lifetimes, we've never experienced something like that, where each and every country had to wrestle with this profoundly disruptive moment. And now, as we're coming out of COVID, I call it this liminal moment, right? It's this transitional moment where we've left one space and we haven't yet gotten to the next thing yet, because we're still defining it. And that's a tremendous responsibility. And it's a tremendous, gift. Necessity is the mother of invention. It is the time where we have to dig deep and be innovative and very, very, very intentional. And I think all of the things that we've been through here in the United States around racial justice, inequity, how do we really build a community that instills belonging and inclusion and really captures the talents of people of all walks of life, both here in the United States and in the smallest village in Africa, right? It's really an attitude that we come in with. So, as we look at Peace Corps, we are looking at both how can we meet the needs of the countries we serve in the unique ways that they are facing right now. So some countries are, advancing and saying, hey, we don't want generalists, we want specialists. And, so we're reaching out and say, how can we reach some different audiences? Other countries are saying, we love having your generalists. We really need our young people to have access to English as the language of the economy, as the language of opportunity. And we need them to be linked to that opportunity and to engage with the sort of passion and energy that your generalists bring. And so we're looking both at how we can, more explicitly and in a more targeted way, respond to the needs that are being expressed by the communities and by those countries. And how do we make this transformational opportunity open to the broadest swath of Americans that we can possibly reach? And I am just out there trying to scream from the rooftops to people of all ages, all walks of life, like this is the moment. It is just like the fall of communism. It is, just this moment in time where we have to sort of shake off the pandemic, get out from behind our screens and take action. And advocacy is one thing, but advocacy is words. We need to get people out there really at the grassroots level, supporting each other, learning about each other, and really learning how to bridge across difference. Having those skills to understand enough about ourselves, to be curious about others, and to learn how to work together in fundamentally different ways. And Peace Corps has some very deep experience doing that, some very robust training programs. And, we feel like we are contributing a great deal just as the world is opening up to being present and recreating those ties and those connections that were lost. Because if we're not showing up, right, that will become the norm, is that we become isolated in our own communities, our own ways of doing and being. And that would just be a tragedy if that was lost. Like we are part of a global community.
Thank you. And you mentioned earlier world peace and friendship. And so I think I had a couple questions around the City Summit of the Americas and Latin America, but I suspect that some of those will come out in the questions. So I'm gonna skip to one of the questions that is really about the Peace Corps volunteers themselves. I engage with them as my students. Some of my students then go on to international work and work with the Peace Corps. And those who are connected to the Peace Corps, they tell me that it's the experience that most changed them, that gave them a new identity, that provided them with a new understanding of the world and a new commitment to the public good, to world peace and friendship, perhaps. So I'd like to ask, what do you see as the biggest impact of Peace Corps on the Peace Corps volunteers themselves?
I think you just answered that question. No, I mean, it's exactly what you said. Every single volunteer I've ever spoken with, regardless of the challenges they faced, and volunteers face significant challenges, significant ups and downs. You know, even if they had to leave service early for a medical reason or whatever else, they all say it was the most important thing they've ever done, and it changed their lives. And I think when you stretch so far beyond your comfort zone, like that's where life begins. That's where you grow. That's where you evolve. And there is nothing like being thrown out there. And, you know, really with a cohort, you make friends with people and go through experiences with people, even in your volunteer cohort, you might not have ever known, and you bond in ways that you might not expect. And I think when your assumptions are challenged in such fundamental ways, it forces you to really think about who you are and how you want to show up in the world.
I do have a follow-up on that, and it comes out of my role as the director of the master's degree in international development, and I teach undergrads in international development courses. And I'll make one more plug: 50% off. Peace Corps volunteers, if you want to come back and study
For life, right?
For life,
That's
yeah,
for life.
that's right. Whatever age you want to start your master's degree is a great time. But these students, they really are. They're the most interesting, self-aware, enthusiastic students. And one of the issues that we are wrestling with in our courses and in the way in which people talk about international development today is the concept of decolonizing development. And so I wonder if you can help me understand more. What does decolonizing development mean to you? How does Peace Corps incorporate attention to these issues into its work?
Yeah. It's a great question that we should all be asking. And I believe that, you know, institutions around the world that do any kind of development work or are engaged in the international space have a tremendous responsibility to be aware of the history of colonization, how that's impacted power dynamics, how it has impacted who's at the table, who's making decisions. And it's something that a lot of organizations are wrestling with. And I will say, from a Peace Corps perspective, you know, we take pride in a lot of the ways that we have approached, you know, our work over the years, and recognize that there are things we need to address and areas that we need to grow and be more intentional in. And I think that will be a long-standing process. Right? It's like so many things, you've got to continue to question, you've got to be intentional, and you've got to evolve. So, you know, more broadly, you know, the other word that's thrown around is localization, right? So how do we localize development? And what that means is who's deciding, right? Who's deciding what's important? How do you work with communities from the inside out, right? Instead of the top down. And Peace Corps has been at the community level since the beginning, right? And I was just at CSU, and they are very proud to have contributed to some of the founding principles of Peace Corps through a feasibility study. And when you look at some of those founding principles from 1961, they're very much the same, right? Understanding that you're going into a community with humility and respect. The way that plays out now is we go to countries where we are invited. We are logical project frameworks and all of the work that we do is guided by the ministries and is developed through a collaborative process with community members, with volunteers, with staff, and with government officials. So it's a very ground up process in terms of determining, what the work is and how we go about the work. And we work within the systems that exist. So all of those things are great, but we take it another level, which is to teach this participatory analysis for community action. So it's called PACA. And it's an approach in which the volunteers spend the first 3 months, going through a series of, decision-making tools and appreciative inquiry, sort of recognizing that there are assets within the community. And, we want to be very aware of, what the community's interests and priorities are. In some countries, they've been able to take it even a step further and have our staff go into the communities beforehand and set actual goals and targets with the community and say, the community wants to reduce, deaths in children under 5. And they're going to implement a 1,000 days program and really track that progress over the course of the volunteer service. Not every country and every community is able to do that just yet. And that's not reflection of the country, it's more reflection on us and what we're able to do and what the data systems are. But we're looking at those accountability mechanisms, sort of how are we reporting back to the community? Our volunteers reporting back to the community and talking through sort of what that feedback loop is, rather than just reporting back to Peace Corps, right? So there are lots of different, things that are embedded sort of in that term of, decolonization or localization. And I think just as you acknowledge the land that we're on here, we have to acknowledge the history. We have to go in with deep respect and a lot of humility. And, some people, when they say that, when they say decolonization, the answer is, or they think the answer is, we shouldn't have Peace Corps, right? Or we shouldn't have these international development organizations. And I challenge that. And I say, yes, institutions do have a tremendous responsibility, to go in with respect, but what does it mean if you pull back? What does it mean if you don't engage? What does it mean if you only choose to engage in your own community with people who are like yourself? Like, that's not the answer. Peace Corps is about connection. So 2 of our 3 goals are about cross-cultural sharing, right? Of the culture, of bringing America to that culture and bringing the culture back. And, if we were going into the most developed country, I think it would still be valuable to have that kind of exchange of experiences and cultures and attitudes and getting to know people who are different than themselves. So I think it's important that we continue to have this dialogue. The field is certainly shifting. It needs to shift, and we need to be more conscious of power dynamics and who's at the table.
Great, thank you for that. I guess I want to ask the question that always comes up in forums like this, oftentimes from the audience, so I'll ask it for them, which is, how can they help? In what ways can the people who are here today connect to the Peace Corps and act more generally in solidarity with the people who live in the countries where Peace Corps works?
Great question. Well, we have recruiters in the back. So if you want to sign up, again, it is the most transformative thing you will ever do. I honestly cannot recommend it highly enough for yourselves, your friends, your daughters, cousins, whoever. So really, if you can't serve yourself, help us get the word out. And we can share the bold invitation campaign. I think that is just incredibly important that we are able to reach out to a number of different communities around the world. The other thing I would say, just to be in solidarity, really working to understand and have that spirit of appreciative inquiry in everything that you do is really at the core of that Peace Corps ethos. Understanding that there is wisdom in every community, understanding that every action that you make in terms of overcoming difference and contributing to the common good matters. And you may not know exactly what that impact is, at the time. Really those are the ways we show up every day. Those are the ways that volunteers continue to show up right back here in the United States. And I think that's incredibly, incredibly important just at this point when it was described yesterday by Mayor Jenny Arndt from Fort Collins, who is a returned volunteer. This was at a luncheon kicking off the city summit. And she said, what maybe started as fissures, in our global society have become fractures, have become a crevice, in society. And we need to combat that in very active and intentional ways so that we can be a healthy and thriving community ourselves.
I think that that's absolutely right. And we'll come back to our Latin America and our city summit questions if they don't come up in the audience questions, but I want to make sure that there is enough time for everybody to ask some questions. We have some from the online contributors, but if people want to hand their question cards forward, we can make sure that they all get asked. Katie will collect some of them, and yeah, anyway. But I have a couple from online, and this is an interesting one. It says, how has the Peace Corps changed since its founding? And this has come up a little bit already in saying that the challenges today are different than the ones at the end of the Cold War, perhaps, and certainly different than the ones in 1961 when it was created. So maybe you have some observations. How has it changed over time?
Sure. Well, as an organization, we always continue to evolve. I have had the honor of speaking with some of the returned volunteers who who served in some of the first Peace Corps groups in the early 60s, one of whom just turned 100. And it was just amazing to talk with her. And I think back then, Peace Corps built up rather quickly. I think they were at 10,000 something volunteers after just a couple of years in 55 countries. And some people were just sort of put out there, right? Trained, but go out and do great things. Now I will say we've got more structure. We're now training overseas in communities, whereas we used to train here in the United States. Technology has certainly played a different role in volunteers' experience and how people engage. There have been volunteers engaged in community mapping for malaria to know whose huts have received the residual spraying, getting the name wrong, but so just all kinds of things, both big and small in terms of how we engage and respond. I will say, coming out of the pandemic where we had a couple of years to really look at what's happening in the world and where we are, we had the opportunity to really hone a lot of our systems of monitoring, both impact of volunteer programs and grants and how those are aligned with logical project frameworks. So there's a very clear structure there. We've implemented a volunteer competency model. So we're very clear with volunteers, here's where you are now, and here's where we expect you to be at the end of this 2-year service. And we monitor that, we give them feedback, and take them on this path that's very clearly laid out. And, we are engaging now in, different kinds of programming, moving into climate change more explicitly, really thinking about youth and youth leadership development, moving from just teaching English to how do we teach English, but also link young people to opportunities. This is the largest generation of youth in history, 1.9 billion youth around the world, 90% of whom live in developing countries. So So where there is opportunity that can yield a demographic dividend, and where there is not opportunity, it can lead to social unrest. And so we are really leaning into, youth leadership development around the world. And, talking about how necessity is the mother of invention, we now have a virtual service program that came at the request of the government of Botswana during the COVID pandemic. And they said, we need help in getting social media messaging out. And so with this program, people volunteer 10 to 15 hours a week. They're called virtual service pilot participants because it's still a pilot program, but we have had more than 500 volunteers serve in 40 countries around the world. We have volunteers who are right now supporting trauma-informed education in Ukraine. So it is the first time we've ever been able, thank you, we've ever been able to be active in an ongoing conflict zone. And it's amazing. We've had these virtual participants talking with teachers who are in bomb shelters and, in other places, very creatively seeing how we can support. So I think what that is opening up for us is, a lot of opportunities of how could a potential, an invitee engage before they went into service. Could they engage, in their community or with a project before they even departed? Could you have hybrid service opportunities, and open it up then for people who maybe can't leave for 2 years, or who maybe didn't medically clear to go into service, but they still want to be a part of it. Or it helps us to reach areas that we maybe couldn't previously reach because of safety and security considerations. And as we look at sort of increases in the frequency of civil unrest and natural disasters, we know that we're going to have to be more flexible in terms of how we approach service and how we reach people and engage them in the opportunity to serve.
Thank you for that. There are some kind of categories of questions,
Okay.
so I'll make an effort to combine some of them. If I miss anything, raise your hand and make sure I get it right. But there were a couple questions here sort of about career paths and the way in which people connect to or could connect to Peace Corps and ongoing careers in international development in the federal government. So one question asks, is Peace Corps a pipeline for careers at state or USAID? Another question asks, has Peace Corps found it difficult to hire and retain young professionals? And then finally, what's the Peace Corps doing to help young people overcome the barriers working in public service?
Mm-hmm.
So the career of Peace
Yes.
Corps and how it connects more broadly.
Yes, great question. And we were just talking about the volunteer competencies and really getting very concrete about those so that employers and others can really see, sort of how volunteers develop skills throughout their service. If you are interested in working in the field of international affairs and international development, there is no greater resume builder and no greater network than Peace Corps. Full stop. Peace Corps, the Peace Corps network, the network of returned volunteers, support each other in a tremendous way. It's just a powerful network. And, I can say that, every job interview I've been to, Peace Corps jumped right out and always gave me something to talk about, when sitting there in an interview. So it definitely helps people stand out no matter what field you're going into. Peace Corps service leads to non-competitive eligibility for federal jobs. So, that is an incredibly important hiring mechanism. It allows federal agencies to bypass, some of the bureaucracy that makes it more difficult to hire people. Not all jobs are designated as NCE eligible, but that's a big benefit. We did a LinkedIn scan. So I feel bad saying this in an academic setting because it is not, rigorous modeling or anything like that. But about 25% of the people who work for the U.S. Agency for International Development are returned Peace Corps volunteers. About 10% for State Department. And I can say that, having worked in Malawi for 5 years, everywhere I turned, someone working for the federal government overseas was a returned volunteer. And that is a badge of honor. It is a badge of, oh, this person knows what it's really like, because a lot of the people who are in those roles don't really get to spend a lot of time outside of the capital and in the rural communities. And it's a lens that provides a lot of credibility. So honestly, best thing you can ever do for your career, and in whatever way it takes you. And I'll take us out of the federal and even out of the international development range for a little bit. The skills of intercultural diversity, equity, and inclusion, problem solving, ability to fail, ability to adapt, all of those things are things that employers are looking for. And I had a high-tech CEO say to me that he looks for Peace Corps volunteers. And I thought, why high tech? Like, volunteers are out in the middle of nowhere. They're away from technology for 2 years. The world changes in the meantime. And they said, no, they know how to fail. So many people don't know how to fail now. And high tech is all about failure. It's about trying something, failing fast, turning around, and picking yourself up and figuring out what's next. And it's not personal. And that's something that we've lost in many ways. So just lots of great stories. There's one of my favorite Peace Corps ads that I keep going back to, and this sort of came up during the pandemic, but it shows, sort of the glass half full, glass half empty, right? Glass half full optimist, glass half empty pessimist, Peace Corps volunteer. I could take a bath in that. Right? It just speaks to the divergent thinking and problem solving that comes from being a Peace Corps volunteer.
Great. Well, I knew that there would be some city summit. It's the City Summit of the Americas and some Latin America questions. It's not an easy one. So 2023 is the 200th anniversary of the Monroe Doctrine, in which the US reserved the right to intervene in the governments of Latin America. Biden has maintained many of Trump's policies on immigration, sanctions on Cuba, excluding countries from the Summit of the Americas. In this City Summit of the Americas, is Biden going to do anything to change this long history of US mistreatment of Latin America? There's another question that says, do you still deal with the rumors that the Peace Corps is a front for the CIA? I think they're related.
Perhaps. So let me say that's an excellent question. Peace Corps is an independent agency, so not associated with the policy of the United States for a reason. And that's why those two questions are related. So we are about people-to-people diplomacy. We are about engaging at the community level with the people of those countries. And so I'm going to dodge that question a bit because it really isn't our realm. We are apolitical and we go where we are invited. We do not push for an invitation. We do not go where we are not invited. And that's an important part of who we are and why we really work hard to maintain that independence, from sort of the foreign policy instruments of the United States. So I hope that is, that's the answer. So I apologize that it's, I'm not going to try and speak for the administration today, because that really isn't Peace Corps' role. We are here at the Summit of the Americas because many of the countries that we have been working in are developing their own national service volunteer programs, and we are supporting that in a number of different ways. And so we're here to talk about volunteerism as a way to build civil society, civic engagement. And there are a number of partners from Guatemala who are here, Bloomberg cities, and we're doing some work with a number of different countries across the Americas that are really looking to this model to engage youth in formal volunteerism programs, which I think can be incredibly powerful, particularly for young people who finish high school or finish college and don't have job opportunities, it's a way to build those skills and to engage them in their own communities.
Thanks. How does the Peace Corps decide when their mission in a country is complete? And how do you transition out of a community or country?
Also great questions. So it really depends. I wish, I could say there was one answer. Sometimes we leave countries because there is civil unrest and it's not safe for us to bring volunteers back. I would say, unfortunately, that's the large majority of countries. We have graduated some countries. So I served as a volunteer in Romania. That program was graduated, as well as the programs in Bulgaria and Poland when those countries joined the EU. So there could be any number of reasons why Peace Corps, enters or leaves. In some places, it's the safety and security environment. Medical services might not be available, or some of the logistics and getting medical evacuations out might prevent us from entering or re-entering. So it's a pretty broad mix in a very nuanced world that we live in. But I would say we were looking at it on an annual basis. We go through a country portfolio review process. It's impacted by our budget and how far we can reach. We were very, very sad that we had to close the Myanmar program after the coup there, and really looked at every way to keep that program open for the people of Myanmar. But even virtual service there was just not feasible given what was happening.
It's interesting you mentioned virtual service. There are a couple of questions here, kind of the tech revolution or change to the way in which things are done nowadays, partly catalyzed by the pandemic. But I wonder if you can say a little bit about the way in which Peace Corps may be innovating or embracing new technologies. Is there any specific recruiting from the tech industry? And when countries ask for specialists, are they asking for these kinds of specializations, or what are they requesting?
Mm-hmm. Countries are asking for all kinds of different things. So Philippines is asking for disaster risk reduction specialists. So when they're asking for, and many of you may not know, we have a 2-year program, which is tends to be more generalist volunteers or generalist assignments. And then we have what's called a Peace Corps response program. So those are very targeted, specific assignments for specialists who might come for 9 months or a year. So when you're asking me about, what kinds of more advanced skills countries are asking for, I'm thinking about Peace Corps response. And it is everything from, epidemiologists following COVID to sort of disaster risk reduction, or people who can support curriculum development, in different sectors. So it really is a broad range. We have not had as many sort of very specific tech requests. We do hear more at the secondary school level requests for people who can teach technology or bring technology in, and that's usually as a secondary project. As we think about some of the second and third goals, right, bringing America to the world and bringing the world back home, there used to be, pen pal programs and things of that nature. Well, now you can jump on a Zoom call and, walk people around your village and have the kids in the community talking directly to kids back here. It's incredible. I think about from a recruiting perspective and sort of going back to your decolonization question, those questions are coming more from the volunteer side than from the country side. So as we think about recruiting, we want to bring those voices of the communities, of the counterparts of the government saying, we want you, right? After COVID, when we evacuated, or not after, while it was unraveling, every single country, we asked them, do you want us back? Right? That was part of our reentry criteria. do you want us? And every single country we left wanted us back. And there's a list of 12 countries that would like us to start new programs, right? So the need is there, the demand is there, and it's really just a matter of how we represent, and whose voices are at the table really saying what it means to them. So we think about it, from that standpoint, who's telling the story and having it, giving that voice to the community in those ways. The other thing that I think about a lot and haven't figured out how to crack this nut yet, so I've got a room full of very smart people, you can help me. Again, as I think about Peace Corps over 60 years, it is much bigger than that one volunteer in one community for 2 years. It is a global network of grassroots change makers, from host families to students, to our staff, to all of the people that we engage with. And these are communities, often we say at the last mile, in some of the most underserved regions of countries. That's a powerful network. As a powerful network that is now just a lot of individuals in different places. That can change in so many ways if we can figure out how to leverage that as those folks as a community of practice, as people who are coming together to represent what's happening in those communities and coming to the table as more than just themselves, and even across borders. Right. So, I have put that challenge out to my team to think about, and, really am open to all kinds of ideas and suggestions. I don't claim, that my accounting degree prepared me for that, for that question, but I see it, right? I see the potential, and I see what's been created over 60 years, and technology can play a very big role in elevating the voices of those who have not had a voice at the table.
Great. I can imagine that this has changed over time, even in recent history. What does the current administration, Congress support for Peace Corps look like? And related, what are your priorities for the agency in terms of size, development, sectors, relationship building, and how do you sell these to Congress to get the necessary money?
Okay. Well, I can say that Peace Corps continues to enjoy bipartisan support, and that is our greatest gift. I think that every member of Congress has constituents, friends, other people. They have seen the impact of Peace Corps. If you have not written to your member, I invite you to write them and tell them about your experience, because it does matter. Support from the administration has been terrific. Peace Corps' budget was flat from 2016 to 2022. And that has meant we've had to tighten our belts in many, many different ways just to keep up with inflation. This year, the president put forward the largest budget ever for Peace Corps at $495 million. We're very, very happy with that. And, my most important job is going around and really explaining where we're at and what's happening with the demand for Peace Corps around the world. And I've talked about the number of countries that are lining up for Peace Corps service, but I can tell you the government of Mongolia said we would take 1,000 volunteers if you would give them to us. Uzbekistan has asked to have volunteers come back. They said, please give us 10,000. The president of Benin, I just met with, he wants 500, right? There's just, and in the Pacific, there's just tremendous demand as well. And I spoke with a Republican committee staffer who went out to the Pacific, and there have been a lot of delegations going to the Pacific and seeing how we can support. And many of them, those countries are saying, we just really want Peace Corps back. And he said, I've worked on this account for a long time. And all of a sudden, I understood. Like being out there, talking to the people and understanding that Peace Corps is part of those countries. It's part of their fabric. It's part of who they are. Like a light bulb went off in my head. And I finally got it. And I hope that the president gives you a great big budget and, we're gonna support you. But it takes a lot of people to do that. So I am, really just trying to make the rounds right now and really explain, where we are and what it means.
Great. This is relevant to this return to places where Peace Corps had to leave after COVID. And what have been some of the biggest challenges to returning Peace Corps volunteers to field operations following COVID?
Mhm. Surprisingly, one of the biggest factors that caused the global evacuation and one of the most difficult things to overcome were medical evacuation hubs. So we had a medevac hub in South Africa and one in Thailand. And once those countries closed their borders and other countries were closing their borders, it was very difficult to navigate, if something happened to a volunteer, where would we take them? And the health and safety of our volunteers is our number one priority. So we need to make sure we've done everything in our power to do that. Thailand didn't open up their medical evacuation services for COVID positive patients for a very long time. And I can tell you, we've looked at every country. I know more now about medical evacuations, hubs and planes and where they start from and go to and land, and why it is way more complicated than anyone ever, can imagine. So as we go back, we are diversifying, to the extent possible where we can take people so that we are not, so over-reliant on any one location. But Asia, Southeast Asia was very slow to open up, both borders in general and opening up, on a medical evacuation side. We didn't think someone would be critically ill with COVID because our medical screening process sort of ruled out some of the sort of people who might be, most vulnerable to severe COVID. But, what if someone was in a tragic car accident and happened to coincidentally test positive? We have to be thinking through every single aspect of, how we would support a volunteer in a crisis.
Great, thanks. Let's see. There's a climate change question. How will Peace Corps support carbon reduction and climate adaptation goals of the countries we are in?
So this is an incredibly important issue, and one that we are really leaning into across all of our sectors, so that an English teacher, can certainly teach English words about climate and English concepts as they are teaching the language themselves and having environmental clubs and so on and so forth. So each country right now is looking at their frameworks, looking at the work that they do, and looking at how they can incorporate climate into every sector, because it does impact every sector. We have had and continue to have an ag sector and an environment sector, but we're looking to build upon those and reach more broadly. As I said, there are also a lot of countries that are asking for Peace Corps response volunteers to help in very targeted, sort of strategic ways across the country.
Great. I think we have time for these two last cards.
Okay.
There may be others to collect if anybody came up with questions as they were listening. I'm happy to include those, but we're getting close to time. But what, here's a question about Ukraine, Russia. What do you see Peace Corps role being post-war Ukraine and Russia? That's optimistic. We hope that can happen quickly, but what would the Peace Corps role be in post-war Ukraine and Russia?
Wow. Well, I can say that right now we have volunteers serving in Moldova, in Georgia, in some of the bordering countries supporting refugees. So that is happening right now, and we are supporting through virtual service. When that happens, again, we will be at the service of the government of Ukraine in terms of what their needs are. I can't really predict that at this moment. What I can say is, as soon as it's safe to get volunteers back, we want to be there in partnership, and again, for the people of Ukraine.
Russia?
We're not currently in Russia, and we haven't been invited to Russia. So if and when we are invited, we will, certainly assess
Okay.
at that time.
Great. So there were these, one more came in, but in any case, what activities does the Peace Corps engage in that might surprise people? And this, I don't want to let you off completely on the Latin America City Summit question. It says here, how is it relevant to the mission of the Peace Corps, and why is it important for advancing U.S. interests? And I might even say in changing U.S. interests. I mean, the City Summit of the Americas doesn't have a real rudder, and U.S. policy in Latin America doesn't have a real rudder. And the Summit of the Americas was kind of a flop last year because there's not a real rudder, and we haven't changed those, problematic relationships that we have with Latin America in its history. Does Peace Corps have a role in changing the way that the U.S. interests operate?
Yeah. So again, I'll take it out of the political realm and into the people to people realm. We have been invited back to a number of countries in addition to the ones we left. And some of those came, after I was at the Summit of the Americas. So for me, that part was a success because we were able to re-engage with some of the countries. And I think that rebuilding trust and rebuilding relationships starts at the people to people, at the grassroots level. And, that is what Peace Corps' business is. That is what we do. That's why we're here, to really make sure that we continue to nurture, those experiences and give opportunities for Americans to go and be part of that rebuilding of relationships and trust.
All right. Some of those policies might have to change to get to that point, but okay. What is the contribution and future of people-to-people diplomacy in addressing the challenges to the U.S. focus with respect to China and issues like climate change?
Mm-hmm. Look, I think it kind of goes back to a lot of what I've said. I think people-to-people diplomacy is incredibly powerful. And I've had the opportunity to interview leaders. This was in Malawi. Everyone from the first female Chief Justice of the Supreme Court to the Lieutenant Governor of the Federal Reserve, all people who were impacted by Peace Corps volunteers. And it meant something to them to have someone show up in their community and be a part of who they were. And that takes it out of the realm of necessarily government policies, government to government, issues and down to the people. And, in Ukraine, what happened right after the war broke out, thousands of returned Peace Corps volunteers were on the phone with their host families, with their students, with their counterparts, helping them find routes out of the country, places to stay in Poland, finding ways to get them resources, every way that you can imagine, both, online and a big hub in Moldova. People just activated in support of that country at the people to people level. And after people serve in the Peace Corps, they have host mothers, they have mothers and fathers and families in the country where they served, and they remain deeply connected to those countries for the rest of their lives. And that's what people to people diplomacy brings, is, that care and concern. And to the extent that people are then going into positions of leadership and positions of authority, they're bringing that with them. And I want to recognize Senator Dodd back there in the back. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for spending some time with us and for your comments and observations. It's been a real pleasure. I think that everybody here has learned and come to appreciate Peace Corps once again and even more. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.